safe. And joining me now is Daniel Levy, who has served as an Israeli negotiator under Prime Ministers Yitzhak Rabin and Ehud Barak during the Israel-Palestine peace talks. And Trita Parsi, an expert on the geopolitics of the Middle East and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Thank you both for being here. Mr. Levy, I do want to start with you. And just to go back just a little bit, you heard Josh Letterman's reporting, but I was very interested in having you respond to the conversation that's happening inside of Israel, in which Prime Minister Netanyahu is under some pretty sharp criticism from his own people for his handling of things and for the intelligence failure, and presumably, at least in some quarters, for what's happening in Gaza. What do you make of that conversation that's happening?
Well, it's a very important variable in how this plays out, Joy, because I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is curbing his enthusiasm for the morning after, whenever this military escalation ends, because that is when the accounting will begin really in earnest for what happened on October 7th. This huge systemic deterrence, intel, military failure, heaped on years, I would argue at least, of mishandling the entire Palestinian situation. But Netanyahu knows that when that happens, it's really a fool's errand to eulogize politically Benjamin Netanyahu. He's the comeback king. He's been around for so long. But I think when that happens, Netanyahu is really going to be in a hard spot. And that means, I think that Netanyahu, who's been a little risk averse militarily, despite all his bad politics in other ways, over the years, I think he has the incentive to not reach that morning after. And I think that means that this American and other efforts to try and pull this back from the brink are really going to have to be redoubled. And they might require working quite deftly with other elements inside the Israeli cabinet, inside the Israeli security establishment. Right now they're unified, but you're going to have to probably tease out differences between them.
Trita Parsi, let me bring you in and ask about the American angle of this, right? Because to add to what Mr. Levy has said, you've now got the American president who came out with full-throated support for the Israeli government initially. He softened his tone somewhat and is talking more about the idea of some sort of rapprochement. What do you make of his role and the prospect of a potential visit? What do you think that then adds to the situation?
Well, I think you're quite right that the president has focused primarily on showing tremendous support for Israel. In the last 48 hours, we've seen an increase in the language of trying to couch everything in terms of international law. But what we're not seeing is very clear statements that says that Israel, despite the fact that it obviously has a right to defend itself, its defense nevertheless has to be within the confines of international law. We've seen the president use the term international law in the same passage, but not in the sense of strongly, publicly requiring Israel to abide by that. And I fear that the absence of stronger language is going to be problematic because it's not going to be sufficient to deter the Israelis. And the request or the effort by the United States to make sure that the Iranians and Hezbollah doesn't get involved in this cannot work if it's only based on deterrence against them without some combination of also seeking some restraint on the Israeli side.
And then to add to that, Daniel Levy, there is a hostage situation to all that both of you gentlemen have talked about. I want to play for you. Lester Holt of NBC News did an interview with a Hamas hostage negotiator. His name is Gerson Baskin, and he's from the International Communities Organization. Let me just play a little clip of that interview.
What is the low-hanging fruit in terms of a deal that could be made?
Right. This is what I've been putting forth since Sunday or Monday. There are 43 Palestinian women in Israeli prison. There are 190 minors, people 15, 16, 17-year-olds. They're defined as minors. To the best of my knowledge, they're all from the West Bank. To the best of my knowledge, none of them have murdered Israelis. That's the low-hanging fruit of what Israel has to offer Hamas, for them to claim something in exchange for women, children, elderly, and sick. That's the humanitarian part of this. We could add civilians in general, but I know that Hamas treats all the young men as soldiers, whether they're soldiers or not.
Daniel Levy, can you envision Benjamin Netanyahu making that kind of a deal?
Well, another development today has been that Hamas has released the first video footage of one of the Israelis being held in Gaza with the permission of the family, apparently. If this can come forward as a more prominent part of the conversation, you just today had the confirmation of the number of Israelis held. What we need, first of all, is for those people to let go. I do think that what we just heard about the prospect of a prisoner exchange is more likely than simply a release, although Hamas has spoken of the release of foreign nationals. If we can get that dynamic moving, if we can get the dynamic of humanitarian assistance getting in, and therefore just be on the beginnings of a de-escalatory cycle, that may be a way that starts to pull back and, of course, addresses the very issue of the people being held, because right now the path down the abyss is not going to bring security for Israelis. And, of course, it's going to bring huge suffering for Palestinians. And if President Biden goes, the way this discourse is going, that's really dehumanizing, I would urge the president, when he wraps his arms around the Israelis, shows empathy, speaks to their humanity, that he does not commit the sin of omission of forgetting the humanity and to show empathy to what's happening to the Palestinians right now as well, because we need to get on that de-escalatory path, and talk of a prisoner swap, of letting prisoners go, could be part of that.
And Trita, last question to you. Talk about being unhelpful. Lindsey Graham, United States Senator, has now threatened U.S. war with Iran. He said if Hezbollah, which is a proxy for Iran, launches a massive attack on Israel, he has said, you escalate the war, we're coming for you. A senator cannot commit the United States to war, but that is the way that Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is talking. That cannot be helpful.
Well, I hardly know of any situation in which Lindsey Graham's response is not to go to war with Iran. That seems to be his standard response to almost everything. But it is a really dangerous situation. And then again, part of the reason why I think it's important for the United States to also ask for restraint from the Israeli side is precisely that if this ends up becoming a larger regional war and the Iranians get dragged in, there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on Biden to also then intervene militarily in that conflict. And then we are suddenly in yet another unnecessary and senseless war in the Middle East. And the United States cannot afford that in the midst of the crisis in Ukraine, in the midst of a potential crisis with China over Taiwan. That's why the de-escalation, ceasefire, these measures are so important.
Daniel Levy and Trita Parsi, please come back. I've really enjoyed talking with you. I think it's been very, very illuminating for our audience. Thank you so much. And up next,